I collect a lot of stuff. Perhaps too much stuff. I collect everything. Figures, games, records, you name it. But one part of my collection that I'm quite passionate about is my collection of art books. And I don't mean just those art books that come packed in collector's editions either. I've actually been collecting art books for quite some time now. I think I've always found them incredibly interesting, as a fan of the source material, the respective artist, or even sometimes just by the style. I've also found them to be inspiring as an amateur illustrator myself. Now, I've only started collecting art books as of 2011, approximately. Prior to that, I generally only associated art books with more traditional artists, rather than those tied to things like games, partly because gaming art books just weren't as common. But thanks to the growing visibility of gaming and geek culture online, we've been seeing more and more art books getting wide releases, along with more and more publishers who are willing to localize them and release them here in the United States. Most of my art books relate to games, but I do have a few that are tied to comics, manga, and anime. Some of my books are artist specific, and, well, there's 1 to 2 books I just straight up can't show you here. The Street Fighter 20th Anniversary book was my very first one, and it all kind of snowballs from there to various other books as they came my way. I tend to enjoy books that have more rough or early draft sketches, because it appeals to my imaginative sense, thinking what the process was when they were making the design. Art books filled with promo art are also nice, but boy, I do love the ones that are just pure art asset dumps. Some people wouldn't care to see every single reaction face for a Persona character, but to me, it really appeals to my inner completionist and wanting to see all the art I recognize from the game. As you may have noticed, these books vary a lot in their choice of format. Now, a lot of this can be attributed to how the original Japanese publisher decided to print the book, or even how the art was originally sized. This is most notable in the Dragon's Crown art book, where a lot of the illustrations are essentially widescreen paintings. I've noticed that some art books lean more toward being biography pieces in conjunction with being art-centric. Take Hyrule Historia, for example. It has sections discussing the Zelda lore and the timeline, along with including a comic piece towards the end of the book. The same thing goes for the Final Fantasy Ultimania books, which offer a lot of text recounting the game's stories, development, and even characters, but still feature more art than, say, the original strategy guide. Due to the amount of text in these books, I'm glad I waited for an English release to get the full experience. Now, not all the books manage to get an English release. Oftentimes it's due to the source material having a more limited appeal, and on some occasions, you might just be surprised which ones actually do make it out to the West. However, even besides that, there are times when the English release might be altered. The English release of this Persona 5 book is reportedly shorter, although accounts state that this is simply due to Prima removing the staff interview. Udon themselves have rebranded and reformatted these Mega Man books from older art book releases, which can be confusing for those who are tracking down which ones they already own. Often, the publisher will list the original Japanese book's name in the publishing notes, but it's not always the case. While I don't mind books with a lot of text, I do prefer the ones that are more art-focused. They are art books, after all. It's why I appreciated the Zelda Arts and Artifacts a bit more than the other 2 books in the series. One of my favorite things about exploring art books is seeing the artwork that wasn't widely publicized. Like here, Toshihiro Kawamoto's book The Elusives Volume 1 shares laserdisc art for both Orgus 2 and Golden Boy, something that a poor VHS boy like myself never saw. The Capcom-based books feature a lot of sweet promo art that was used in Famitsu, and even stuff like... Oh no... Anyways, moving on. Flipping through these is oftentimes a huge blast from the past. I know it gets discussed a lot, but it fascinates me looking back through old Akira Toriyama Dragon Ball art, where it starts off looking like Dr. Slump, eventually evolving to that angular Boo Saga art, and then back to somewhere in the middle. I've actually been lucky enough to get a couple of art books signed, too. Most notably Suda51, who signed my Grasshopper Manufacture art book. I even kept the maybe sticky note as it was getting towards the end of his signing, and I was told by his staff that I wasn't guaranteed a signing. I also lucked out by getting Shigenori Soejima's signature, when he had his Persona 5 and Catherine art displayed at the Gallery Nucleus in Alhambra. Outside of these, some of my other notable books include my copy of Joe Joveler, which is to date still the most expensive art book I ever bought. It even came with this Blu-ray featuring documentary footage of Araki's gallery. Also, this thing is just enormous, and it's split across all these other smaller books. The Metal Gear art book is also the same deal. The thing is hefty and is stretched across 2 books, but it is amazing. My very first expensive art book was actually this Marvel vs. Capcom book that was a Comic-Con exclusive back in 2012. I remember being incentivized because it was a unique Western release, and it even came included with an art commission and a print. I haven't always been lucky. You don't always hit home runs, and everyone has a strikeout from time to time. Case in point, I overpaid for this Berserk book because at the time I wasn't super import savvy, and the con vendor hyped it up as being rare. It's a great book, but I later discovered that it wasn't that rare or that expensive. I also prematurely pulled the trigger on this East book because I suspected that it would never get a Western release. And boy, was I wrong, as Udon would later reveal that they would be publishing it here. There's also the fact that I've also slept on buying a few books here and there on the presumption that I would just be able to buy them later. Volume 2 of the Elusives. Art of Capcom. Just like any other book, art books are also subject to going out of print, or becoming either rare, or simply expensive to buy. Thankfully, I have few regrets. Although, I am missing that Dark Souls 2 book. Outside of missing out on art books, I can't really say I've ever been disappointed in them. At worst, it's a minor nitpick here and there, like 2-page spreads that cut off the art, or something small like that. Lately, I've actually been picking up a few more Western books, and for the most part, they're all comic book related. At last year's Comic-Con, I picked up both this J. Scott Campbell book and the Spider-Man book. Besides the fact that Spider-Man is my all-time favorite hero, I thoroughly enjoyed this book since it goes through the chronological order of most of the major artists to have drawn the old webhead himself. It's almost like reading a history book, but it's Spider-Man. I also got this Alex Ross book, and I mean, it's amazing. It's Alex Ross, he's amazing. This particular book focuses on all his Marvel works, and it's even organized by character, and it even features some of his earliest drawings. Just good stuff. Maybe sometime down the line, I'll pick up his DC one too. Even while producing this very video, I actually had another art book come in, and it's massive too. I should probably start getting selective with my shelf space. Nah. If you're a fan of art, art books might be something you might want to consider, as they make great reference, and more than anything, they're a great source of inspiration to any budding artist and non-artists alike. Art books are a great record of all the laborious efforts of some hard-working, talented people in all art-centric mediums. Care and attention goes to designing everything, from a tiny robot minion in a Mega Man game to the intricate fabric folds in Murgo's wet nurse from Bloodborne. Sometimes the level of care put into design something may only last seconds on the screen, but it can be immortalized and admired for years when printed in the pages of an art book.